I stared silently at the face in the mirror. Eric's voice sounded distant and incoherent, too dissociated from whatever reality I was trapped in at that moment to be understood. I mumbled, interrupting the monologue. I think I should go to the hospital. Yeah, Eric stuttered with relief. Yeah, Jim, that's a great idea. Let's do that. I barely registered the crisp night air greeting me as I stepped out from the warmth of the cabin, but it did seem to restore some of my faculties as I climbed into the truck. Shotgunned, I barked with a wry grin. Eric chuckled nervously. Of course. We sat in silence for a bit, the moonless night offering no assistance to the headlights blazing a trail down the mountain. My chauffeur winced when I finally spoke. So, how long have you known about this? I stared across the cab, watching him rub the back of his neck like it was a magic lamp with the answer he was looking for. Just tell me what you know. Well, it's like I was saying, he began. I had always heard stories, but this was back then, you know. I was just starting out before I ever thought about running things around here. The guy who was at the time. I forget his name. He was the one telling them, swore he saw things out in the woods, things that shouldn't be there. Not litter or abandoned pets, but something. I know, I interjected flatly. Who else knows? How long? No, nothing like that, Eric insisted. It was just stories, and it was before even your time with us. I told you I didn't know anything like that was really out there. How could I? I scoffed. Is my face just a story too? Awkward silence resumed until the silhouette of the visitor's center emerged from the roadside. Just drop me at my truck, I said. I can drive myself. Jim, come on, Eric said. I said, I'm sorry. It's not about that, I interrupted. I just need to clear my head. After some resistance, he relented, pulling into the parking lot. I'll let the others know you're in the hospital tomorrow when we regroup from the other stations. He called after me as I stepped out. I turned to face him. Yep, I don't think I'm going to make it in, boss, I jabbed, closing the door. Are you going to tell them what happened? Eric glanced down, hesitating. Yeah. You rest up and let me know how you're getting along. We can talk about disability insurance to hold you over the rest of the season, if the doctor recommends that route. I don't think there's any reason to rush things. People have to know, I responded. They've got to close the park, Eric. At least for a while. You know that. Convince whoever you have to. Whatever's out there is beyond dangerous. I'll handle it. You have my word, he assured me. Goodbye, Jim. With that, he turned and headed back in the direction of the park. Alone with my thoughts again, I wondered how my boss could manage to be so nonchalant about what happened. Even if he still didn't believe a word I said, there was no denying my impossibly deteriorated physical state. And what about my coworkers? The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. By the time I made it to the hospital, I thought about continuing the rest of the way home. Whether I'd really been missing for days or weeks, I hadn't slept since passing out in the car that belonged to the missing hikers. I reasoned I shouldn't be driving alone at night, sleep-deprived and possibly injured or sick. In the end, I decided Eric wouldn't let me come back to work if I didn't get checked out, and I very well could need medical attention. At first, I was pleasantly surprised to see the deserted parking lot as I pulled in. Hopefully it meant whoever was on call wouldn't take too long to have a look at me. Even now, I still kick myself for not being at least a little suspicious, especially after everything I'd been through. As I walked through the automatic doors, the sound of my footsteps echoed through an empty room, breaking the eerie silence. It was late, sure, but this was the only hospital for miles. How could I be the only visitor? The hallway stretched before me, lit only by the dim glow of flickering overhead lights. The linoleum floor was scuffed and worn, and the walls were lined with dull paint. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, with a soft thud trapping me in the eerie stillness. The place had a sterile and slightly antiseptic smell, but underneath it, there was a musty and stale odor that lingered. The scent of old books and neglect filled the air, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. It was dimly lit, with only a few flickering lights illuminating the path ahead. A flash of movement at the end of the hallway caught my attention, and I made my way towards it. As I got closer, I saw a figure hunched over a desk. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. The figure looked up, startled, and I saw that it was a woman, her hair in a messy bun and her glasses sliding down her nose. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you," I said, making my way over to her. "I was just wondering if there's anyone here who can check me out. I think I might be sick. Or, injured." The woman looked me up and down, taking in my ragged appearance. "Take this and have a seat," she said finally, the gravel in her voice betraying what I assumed to be a prolific smoking habit. "Someone will be with you shortly." She handed me a clipboard and a pen that looked as worn out as the yellowed intake forms. "Thanks," I responded, sighing. I knew I should have just gone home. I turned to survey a room of empty chairs, their stale fabric accented by an aged turquoise hue. "Do you know about how long it'll be?" I asked. "Where the hell is everyone?" She didn't even look up. "Sir, you need to take a seat and fill that out like everyone else. Someone will be with you shortly." "Got it," I responded, rolling my eyes and motioning towards the empty waiting area. "Just like everyone else." I took the clipboard and pen and made my way to the chairs. As I sat down, I glanced over the form. It didn't take long for the lines to blur together as the throbbing behind my eyes returned with a vengeance. I swore under my breath. "Ma'am, I really don't feel well. Is there someone? Anyone?" No response. I set the paperwork down in defeat, the distant scratching sound of the woman's furious scribbles continuing unabated. As I waited, I felt my eyelids getting heavier. The exhaustion was finally catching up to me. I tried to fight it, but my body had other plans, and soon enough, I drifted off. I don't know how much time passed before I felt wads of paper periodically thudding against my face, like an improvised alarm clock. "Rise and shine," another voice said. I opened my eyes to see my intake forms scattered around me on the floor in crumpled bits. I sat up, groggily rubbing my eyes and trying to make sense of what was happening. The woman from the front desk was nowhere in sight, and instead I was met with the sight of a tall, lanky man standing before me in a hospital gown. He had a mop of greasy salt and pepper hair to match his beard, and I couldn't tell if it was curly or just matted, his eyes hidden behind a pair of sunglasses. "Who are you?" I asked, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. The man chuckled, his voice laced with amusement. "Relax, buddy. I'm just here to check up on you. You looked like you needed some help." I narrowed my eyes, feeling my pulse quicken. This didn't feel right, and I didn't know what to do. "Listen, I appreciate the concern," I said, slowly getting to my feet. "But unless you're staff, I think I'll just head home." Wherever that receptionist went, she was apparently full of it. The man's expression changed, fear rising in his voice. "You mean, you've seen her?" "Yeah," I said. "She checked me in, or at least she was going to until—" Wait, the stranger interrupted, getting a little too close. "You mean to tell me you've seen an older woman sitting there scrawling on a notepad?" he asked, pointing at the desk. "Yes," I answered, exasperated. "I don't know how old she is. I came in tonight, or was it last night by now? Anyway, she was the only one here for some reason, so I asked her to see a doctor. She told me." She spoke to you," my pursuer interjected again as I headed for the doors. "Yep," I replied, picking up my pace. "I assume that's, her job. She asked me to fill out those forms you so kindly trashed." He stopped. "You must be something special," he said. giggling in a way that convinced me I was making the right decision. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he called after me. I stopped. "You've been there before, I should say." "The hell did you say?" I asked, turning. "You know," he answered, scurrying over. "I don't know much," I retorted, "but I do know you're creeping me out. Look, I can't deal with this right now. I just need to go home and get some rest." "Rest?" he snickered. "You won't be resting anytime soon, my friend. Not when you've seen what you've seen." As he moved close again, too close, I could smell the stench of alcohol and decay on his breath. The situation was getting out of hand, and I needed to get out of there fast. I tried to push past him, but he grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip tightening. "You need to tell me everything," he demanded, his voice growing more and more frantic. "What did you see? Did you see it? How did you get away?" My mind raced with far more questions than answers. I had no idea what he was talking about, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I mustered all of my strength and shoved him away, stumbling back towards the glass doors. "I don't know," I yelled. "And I don't want to know. I just want to leave." He let out a guttural laugh, his eyes glinting with madness. "You can't leave," he said, his voice low and ominous. "No one can leave. Haven't you realized that yet?" I backed away from him, my heart racing. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You work for the park too, don't you?" he asked gleefully. I knew it. I tried to tell them, to warn everyone. "Look, pal," I said, regaining my composure. "I don't know who you are, but we both know you don't work for the park. Now, if you'll excuse me," I turned again and headed for the doors. I could see it was still dark out as I neared the exit, and I braced myself for the evening chill. As irritated as I was at having wasted so much time sitting there, I was by now relieved to be going home, finally. But as I stepped across the threshold, automatic doors whirring aside, I found myself face to face with the stranger again. The waiting room and reception spread before me at the end of the hall, where an empty parking lot should have been. I whirled around and saw another long hallway, another waiting room and reception desk dimly illuminated at the end. "Told you, nobody leaves," he said, grinning ear to ear. You son of a bitch," I seethed, lunging closer and grabbing a hold of my tormentor by the scruff of his filthy garb. He burst out cackling, the stench knocking me back. "I'm not your enemy, pal. Accepting that is your only shot at getting out of here." I let go of his gown, jabbing my finger in his face. "I don't know who you are or what you are," I said, fuming, "but you've got 5 seconds to start making sense before I put you through the plate glass and make myself a door." "I'm not in control of anything here," he retorted, "any more than you were in those woods. But I'm willing to bet, since you made it out too, you and I might have something in common." "Who are you?" I asked, hesitating. "Met Hoskins, National Forest Service," he said, extending a hand. "How long's it been? Out there, I mean." "Outside," I said, quizzically shaking his hand. "Name's Jim." "Well, Jim, nice to meet you." Ned smiled warmly, his discolored teeth seeming more pitiful than threatening now. "Yes, outside, at the park. I gotta say, you are the second luckiest unlucky bastard I have ever met, here or anywhere. If we can get you out of here and back there, you might just take top spot from me." "I don't know what the hell any of that is supposed to mean," I scoffed. "But yeah, the park is open. It's peak season right now." Red shook his head. "You know how it is here. I can't tell you the last time I've seen the sun. I get hungry and thirsty. I move around to find sustenance where I can. I sleep. I wake up over and over. But if it weren't for that, I can hardly tell time passes at all." "Yeah," I said reluctantly, "you were saying you can get me out of here, right?" "If I could get out of here, I would have by now. That much I can tell you for certain. The despair in his eyes seemed genuine, but it wasn't the answer I needed. "All right, guess I'll have to make myself a door," I declared, moving in to hoist him up one last time. "You think I haven't already tried that?" Ned replied, shoving me aside. "You think I haven't thrown myself and anything else I can lift through those floor-to-ceiling windows over there before? To escape? To end it all? Or just to see what happens? Go right ahead and do it. You can't do any worse than this." He yanked open the hole in the side of his tattered hospital gown and showed me a jagged scar extending from under his arm on down, nearly to his torso. "However tough you think you are, you can't launch me at any wall here that I haven't tried harder myself." I frowned, scanning the room, searching for any other exit. Nothing. As far as I could tell, the corridors leading out only led to more of the same. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could utter a word, Ned continued. "I had just transferred in from another park not too long before the headache started. I didn't think anything of it at first, let alone whether they had any connection to the strange disappearances. Not too many more than typical, I would say, but enough to make you wonder. As new management, I just wanted to give a good impression to the team and not make too many waves. But eventually, he trailed off. It all feels so long ago now. The first time it found me out there, I didn't even realize what was happening until I made it out. I kept thinking I was just imagining it, or that maybe I was losing my mind, but I could always feel this pull calling me back. "I'm not sure I follow," I ventured. "This!" Ned cried, gesticulating. I stared at him for a moment, resigning myself. I sauntered back to the nearest chair and crashed down in a heap, heaving a sigh. "I'm trying to keep it together here," I said finally, lifting my head from my hands. "What do you know about all this? You said you work for the park. I've worked there for years. Never seen you before in my life. Eric's never mentioned you either, and he's—" "What did you just say?" Ned practically leapt to my side with startling agility for a man in his condition. "Eric," he stuttered. "Not Eric Malthus." "Yeah, that's him," I replied casually. "Worked with him for years. Decent boss, nice guy. Except for lately when he ditched me in the woods looking for some hikers. That's how I got stuck there." "Oh," Ned staggered back. "Oh no." "What?" I demanded, glancing around nervously. Ned laughed, settling into the seat across from me. "You're screwed, my friend." "You mentioned that," I shot back, annoyed, "and I'm not your friend." "Suit yourself," he replied, smiling, "but your other friend, Eric. You don't really know what he is, do you?" "Course I do," I shrugged. "I just told you. And if you really worked for the park, he'd have at least mentioned you to me. He's been running the place for as long as I've been there." I watched the color drain from Ned's face in response. That son of a bitch," he muttered, shaking. "I take it you two didn't get along then," I snarked. Ned heaved a long sigh. "I've been stuck here too long. That little bastard really went and turned the whole park into—" "Into what?" I asked. All of a sudden, Ned jumped to his feet, his agility once again giving me a more manic vibe than I was comfortable with. "Shift change," he said in a low, terrified voice. "Huh," I groaned in resignation. "Let's get out of here, now," he replied frantically. Before I could even stand, he sprinted down the hall. It took every ounce of strength I had left to catch up with him. "Hold up!" I gasped as we zoomed past opening doors and the occasional window into adjacent rooms, spiking my adrenaline as I reached Ned's side. I arrived at an explanation of sorts, though only in the sense that scenes of writhing human bodies told me I needed to follow his advice. In contrast to the eerie silence of the hallway, a cacophony of screams seemed to fade in and out like an old TV signal as glimpses of incomprehensible amalgamations of the human form confirmed their source. A seemingly endless row of rooms, large and small, scrolled past us like a live medical horror show. The doors were heavy and metal, their surfaces stained with rust and bloody handprints. Through the small windows, I caught glimpses of stainless steel tables, sharp surgical tools, and twisted forms of human bodies. The air was thick with the stench of death, blood, and decay. My nostrils burned as I tried to catch my breath between gasps, and the smell only grew stronger. "There," Ned hissed, gesturing towards a stairwell exit. I followed him as he crashed through the door and down flights of stairs. At each one, he tugged on the door without success. Finally, we settled on a landing, huffing and puffing. "What the hell?" I heaved. "Not yet," he answered, reaching out again for the door. This time, it gave way, and we slipped inside, rushing to close it behind us. My guide's head was on a swivel, wild-eyed, but, by all indications, the scene before us wasn't unlike what I found when I arrived. The both of us heaved a sigh of relief as we caught our breath. "So," I said finally, "any chance you're going to make sense of any of this?" "You've made it this far," Ned answered. "Walk with me. I think I have something that will interest you." Part of me wondered if I should make a break for it, but the rest of me couldn't come up with a destination. I followed him down the hall past 2 or 3 of the same desk and waiting area, until he stopped at what looked like a supply closet in one of the corridors. Opening it, he disappeared inside, leaving me standing in the hall and wondering whether any of this was worth it. I heard some shuffling and a scraping sound in the dark before a match lit up the area. "Come on," Ned beckoned towards an opening in the back wall. "This is the place to be when this place starts acting up. Trust me, wandering around out there is the last thing you want to do." By this point, I could barely stand. My head was spinning, and a dull pain had begun to spread behind my eyes. It had been, I don't know, how long since I'd eaten properly or slept through the night. Any place to rest was better than the alternative. I followed Ned into the hidden room, my eyes adjusting to the dim, ethereal light that seemed to come from nowhere, just like what I'd experienced in the woods. It was cramped and musty, but it seemed to have a fair amount of food and water stashed away. Ned lit a candle while I collapsed into a heap in the corner. "Home, sweet home," Ned sighed with satisfaction, closing the closet door and moving some boxes in front of the hole in the wall, while I collapsed onto a pile of blankets in the corner. "Thanks for sharing," I murmured. "No trouble at all," my host grinned. "You know how it is around here. Whenever you start hearing those god-awful screams coming from Eric's victims, it's time to get going. I'm not saying I know much about it, but I've noticed things get hairy whenever that receptionist you saw migrates from one floor to another, so I just call it a shift change. Things don't always work that way, mind you, but seeing as how you just showed up, it must hunger for you, something terrible." "It?" I asked. "Yeah," Ned replied. "It. When I was still running things at the park, Eric was just a snot-nosed trainee, always acting like he had something to prove from the get-go. Tried to tell me and the other rangers what's what all the time, even when he didn't know what he was talking about. That's when this whole mess started. Still, it never occurred to me he was connected until it was too late." "What do you mean, his victims?" I interrupted. "Those people and the missing people in the woods." "Correct," Ned continued. "I can't say for sure whether Eric lured every missing hiker, every lost camper to their doom, the way he did you and I, but I can tell you right now, he's a sick, twisted man who's responsible for what you saw up there." "Lured me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Nah, he had crews out there looking for me for weeks. He told me so himself. I mean, if the goal was to make me like them, why send me here on my own?" "I don't know you," he interjected, "and I don't know your story. But based on my experience with your friend, let me ask you which version makes more sense. That your boss, the guy who's been managing things for as long as you've been there, had no idea a cancerous malevolence spawned by an ancient evil existed. Under his nose, Found out only after you went missing and survived. Dismissed your concerns and just so happened to send you right back into it. Here at this hospital, all by accident. Or could it be your friend isn't who he says he is? That he's an evil megalomaniac who lured a bunch of us out into the woods like sacrificial animals to trade for his own purposes. After he failed to seal my fate, unlike the others, he doubled down, insisting I spread the rot like a sickness to the nearest hospital, under the auspices of getting me treatment. I stared at him for a moment. I drove myself here, was all I could muster. Then you are unlucky twice over, he chuckled. I don't know why some people like us, I suppose, come across it and live to tell the story. Maybe it's dumb luck, ironically. But now that I've met you, I'm more certain than ever it can't be. I'm telling you this because if there's any chance you make it out of here, you're the only one who can stop him. Stop all this, Ned implored, motioning towards the door. For a while, I didn't say anything at all, partly due to exhaustion, partly because I was even more unsure of Ned's mental stability. After all, who knows how long he'd been trapped in this place? It'd be more than enough to make anyone lose it. Still, though, I couldn't help myself. If there was any way for me to get out, I had to know more. What does the park have to do with this hospital? I asked. What does anything Eric is doing in the park have to do with you getting stuck here? Well, like I said, I think I might have something that interests you, he replied, pulling a tattered notebook out of a box. It was worn and frayed with years of use, the cover wrinkled and faded. As he held it out to me, the pages shifted and threatened to fall out. The musty smell of old paper and mildew made me wonder if I could stand to be interested in it to begin with. All guesswork, of course. He shrugged, but I've had nothing to do but think about how I got here and how to get out. If there's a way, I've tried it, but it might give you some of the answers you're looking for. The place wasn't like this when I got here, and I can't recall now when things began to change. I checked myself in, same as you did. Spent a couple days being evaluated after everything it does to you. He pointed at his face and I shuddered, remembering the first time I'd seen myself in the mirror since finding my way back. Then at some point, time started to blur together, and before I knew it, I couldn't leave. Things have only gotten worse ever since. My God, I responded. So this, decay, it spreads from place to place, I asked, hardly believing the words coming out of my mouth. That's the best way I can describe it. Yeah. He nodded. Even if you manage to escape, you should be careful where you spend your time. I think once you've been touched, so to speak, it stays with you. I've only seen the entity at the center of all this once. When Eric insisted we all head out there into the woods together, looking for missing people. Difficult to describe. The body of a man, the head of a dog, or maybe a goat. I remember hooves, sharp teeth, fur, something like a twisted avatar of nature itself. I couldn't get a good look at it before I passed out from those splitting headaches you get. By the time I came to, the creature was gone, and Eric had found me. Even after he drove me here to the hospital and for a good while longer, I still thought he'd saved my life. You showing up now just confirms my suspicions. He must be feeding it. This monster of yours, I ventured, it eats people, and the people I found in the woods. The people upstairs, what about them? That's not what I mean, Ned paused. I mean to say, the madness of the void rots more than the mind and body. The world around us, too. What if this thing, camped out there in the woods, is spreading it somehow? Feeding off of it? That doesn't make any sense, I sighed. But I'm sorry you've been stuck here for so long. I can't imagine it. He shrugged. There isn't much happening to either of us that makes any sense. Hopefully, imagining it is the worst you'll experience. With that, my bizarre new acquaintance simply turned and lay down to sleep without another word. I stifled a chuckle and looked down at the tattered notebook. My mind raced, and yet I was near passing out myself. I had yet to learn anything that might help me escape. Part of me was screaming to get back out there and find a way out before Ned woke up and decided I was the one behind his predicament after all. But physically, I couldn't resist the urge to sleep much longer. I decided to compromise and take a look at the notebook. It was filled with scrawled text and drawings, some of which were so faded and smudged that I couldn't make out what they were. But as I read on, I began to piece together a picture consistent with what he described. Moreover, the similarities between our experiences, the headaches, the disappearances, discovering this phenomenon in the woods, shook me to my core, and yet still nothing about a way to escape it. Overwhelmed, I must have drifted off soon after, because the next thing I remember is opening my eyes to see a large rat staring back at me, curiously. I'm not sure which was a more effective wake-up call, the unwelcome guest or the realization that Ned was gone. Panic crept up my spine as I scanned the small space for any sign of where he went. The rat scurried away as I tossed aside the notebook and crawled out into the closet. I rose, stumbling as my legs shook my stiffened frame. I steadied myself against the wall and took a few deep breaths. The door to the room was still closed, but I was suddenly struck with the feeling that I was not alone. "Ned," I whispered, hoping he was just outside the door. There was no response. I took a step towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't ready for what greeted me on the other side.